gonna quite get our VR face on just yet, but sit tight.
When you use virtual reality at home, you're always trying not to touch anything. Your real-world surroundings, the thinking goes, break the illusion of VR. But it turns out that if you merge the two things, you end up with an experience that's far more immersive. At The Void, a quote, hyper-reality facility, they're melding state-of-the-art VR tech with real-world physicality, and in doing so, they're leading a wave of location-based VR. It's a little bit video game, a little bit laser tag, and feels more like an actual adventure than anything else on the market.
And we have fire.
In The Void, every VR space has a real-world counterpart, so physical walls and real-world peripherals intensify that tactility.
Wow, where are we?
Dude, I thought this was inside. No, we're outside. It's a starry night.
When you step into a virtual world, you step in untethered. You step in wearing equipment that is there not just to get you to see the environment, but to feel it as well.
So this is the so-called backtop system. On the back, there is a computer and a big battery pack. On the front, there's a bunch of haptics, kind of rumble packs, and then you put it on, and then there's one more fun part. Now with the headset, which is also part of the Rapture system, a little bit of it is kind of off the shelf, and a lot of it is made special by The Void. The HMD, the head-mounted display, is actually an Oculus Rift, and there's also a Leap Motion module on the front of it, so it tracks your hands. Still, seeing my hands is never going to lose its appeal or novelty. Hyper-reality, as they call it, and then other stuff on the inside that they have made themselves, but that's really the heart of the headset.
But for all this tech, hyper-reality actually uses some old-school magic theory.
Virtual reality, in its truest sense, is a form of magic. Magic is just creating a new reality for people, using the tools that are available, whether that's picking up a coin and using sleight of hand to make someone think, even if it's just for a second, that that coin could vanish. That's a little reality that you were able to create for them. VR is the same way. We're trying to create new realities that people believe in. So it makes sense to use magic principles to take that to its furthest extent and really get people embedded and immersed in these worlds.
It's easy to assume that The Void would be in a tech or entertainment hotspot like Seattle or Silicon Valley or Los Angeles. But it's here, a half hour outside Salt Lake City. And while the company has plans to expand to other cities in the near future, for now, they're keeping it local.
We've learned a lot this year about the process of getting people into the void and out of the void, and the best way to do that, most efficient way to do that. How do we track them as accurately as possible? How do we get them to interact with objects as accurately as possible? How do we represent where their eyes are looking and what their emotions are to the people around them? Because there's so much communication as nonverbal. We want to capture that, and that's been one of the bigger technical challenges we've had, but one that fortunately we don't have to just solve ourselves, because there's a whole industry out there trying to also solve this very problem. If I walk over to a wall and I reach out to touch that wall, I'm going to feel it, and if it's bricks, I'm going to feel bricks. If something blows up.
Whoa! Okay, the door exploded. Yeah, everything just went off. That haptic feedback is really something.
I'm going to feel the blast of that explosion. If there's fire, I'm going to feel that heat.
It's warm.
It's more than just your eyes. Reality is way more than just your eyes. And so we represent all of those things in the void to different degrees. And it's the compilation of these sensory effects that combine together to create a new reality. And then we just don't just make a regular reality, we make an impossible reality for you to play in.
So I have done a lot of things in virtual reality, but I can't say I've ever done something that brought together so many different types of experiences into a single one, let alone one that was so completely unique.
The end result combines elements of video games, movies, and real-world obstacle courses. But the fact that you share the experience with other people makes it more than the sum of its parts. Your partners aren't logged in at computers hundreds of miles away, they're right there with you in the room. And that social aspect sticks with you long after you come out.
It's not hard to imagine that this is going to get VR into the hands and onto the faces of many, 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 many more people than might have tried it otherwise.
Okay. So, I think it's pretty cool to see what some people are doing with higher budgets in VR. And by higher budgets, I certainly don't mean the military budgets for immersive simulation that we had 20 years ago, right? Like what used to cost 50 to 100 grand now is like, off the shelf, like $300-400 hardware. And I thought the Void was really cool because they're doing some interesting things with VR, right? They're using both active and passive haptics. I believe you guys have all had Professor Sadajic's class on a immersive sim, right? Am I correct in assuming that?
I think some of us have just had her like intro to VE.
Intro to virtual environments.
Yeah, which was
Okay. So, all right, maybe I won't be like rehashing too much here. This will be a little more fresh than I thought it would be. But the idea of passive haptics means that there's actual a real physical thing for you to make contact with. So if you can imagine wearing all that gear and you're walking through this warehouse, and the warehouse could be like all gray, have a bunch of structures set around everywhere. But when you look through the headset, right, you might see those same walls, but now the walls you see in VR are, completely different, right? There might be like jungle vines hanging down, or they might be like intricate brickwork in a dungeon, like who knows? You're just pretty much making the virtual and the real coincide so that, it just enhances the believability of things. And they combine that with active haptics, which is, kind of the vibration based mechanisms like you could see in the guy's vest, or rumble in a joystick, right? Sometimes that can be more convincing than you would expect for certain use cases. But I think anytime you add any of those, sensory experiences, that really enhances the immersive qualities of your simulation. So that said, let's see, the Void, they're all over the place now. I think they're in San Francisco, although definitely not open anymore. Hopefully they don't close down because of the current human malware. Anyway, let's get into some more VR detail here. What I'm planning to do for today actually is I'll just kind of give a more broad overview of some VR things, and then we'll kind of go back and I'll fill in some loose ends from animation that we didn't talk about yesterday. Namely, I want to show you guys how to grab stuff from Mixamo and pull that in, and then maybe just go through an example of animating a camera in a path. So continuing with VR stuff, let's first look at some requirements here. Sorry, Mac users, you're probably asking for trouble doing this. It is possible to get VR to work on a Mac, although it's definitely not something anyone prioritizes, and operating system support in the drivers is not great. But oh yeah, also one of the major players in the VR space that they do namely Steam VR, that they support a couple of headsets we're going to talk about. They've officially discontinued support for the Mac. So, Windows preferably, that's kind of going to be generally the way to go. And then you'll need a sufficiently powerful graphics card. Now, in the not too distant past, that meant buying pretty much the best you could buy just so that you could run something reasonably well. But luckily, the high-end hardware of yesteryear is now the mid-range of now, and this is much more accessible than it was before. Although the min specs, you probably don't want to, I still wouldn't try to go with the GTX 970 for reasons we'll get into. But let's survey the landscape a little bit, and let me come back to a real slide here. Ideally, if you can afford it, the best of the current crop are very sufficient and will work really well for VR, but NVIDIA is going to announce their new graphics cards tomorrow for the next generation, so that'll push us one step further toward everyone being able to run this with ease. But currently, the cream of the crop is if you want to go for an NVIDIA card, hopefully like a GeForce, you know, a 2080 Ti is great, but it's also like $1,100. Check the chat. Yeah. I probably waste a lot of time trying to make this work on Mac. Also, speaking of wasting time, if you're going to go and pick a graphics card, there's going to be a couple of different people to go through, a couple different makers of graphics cards that you'll have to choose from, right? There will be AMD and there will be NVIDIA. And these are both plenty capable cards, right? They both have offerings that will support you in VR. Just from a developer standpoint, I would always recommend NVIDIA over AMD just due to the support of their drivers. So again, you know, Mac doesn't have very good operating system support, you know, and the driver support is even worse. So on Windows, if you have good operating system support and driver support through NVIDIA, you know, at least you have that to start from. AMD has frequently had issues, so that's just a potential source of headaches I would try to avoid. But let's kind of survey the hardware that we have to choose from right now. Here's kind of the mainstream stuff that I'm putting over on this page. There are actually dozens more to choose from, but they are likely to be a little bit more niche than these. So to start off at what I would say the best mainstream offering, you know, questionably, I guess people could say maybe choose Pimax. I don't really have experience with this, but the Valve Index is something that came from the company Valve, who was really instrumental in getting you know, VR off the ground in the beginning, or I shouldn't say in the beginning, in this last round of getting VR going again, right? So VR has a long history, and it really was kind of, you know, left as something that wasn't really tractable until recently, when all the elements came together to allow us to do this, to create VR very cheaply and very with very high fidelity. You know, we didn't really have that before. Pimax 5K, best field of view, right? I've heard a lot of times with some of these really high field of view headsets, they might support a high field of view, but you're still limited by the physical piece of glass lens that you have in there, right? And there's no Moore's law for lenses in a head-mounted display, right? Those progress is a little, well, more than a little less, not very predictable as to how that's going to advance, right? There are advances in optics, but you can't really forecast how that's going to be or how much it's going to cost or anything like that. It doesn't really just go at a steady, more or less steady pace like CPUs do, and GPUs for that matter. So for all intents and purposes, the Valve Index is what you should choose if you have the choice amongst these. I have one here at my house to test with, and it is quite nice. The display is a pretty high resolution, and this will matter a lot in VR because the screen is sitting, you know, 1.5 inches away from your eyes, or 2 inches, whatever. It's not very far. So when you have a low resolution, it doesn't matter if you have like millions of pixels. They better be dense enough such that you don't see these grid lines or this what they call the screen door effect on your screen. when you're looking at a piece of text in VR, hopefully you can read it and not squint thinking that that'll make it better. The Valve Index does a pretty good job of allowing this to happen. You get a resolution of 1440 by 1600 per eye, and the field of view is pretty good. 130 degrees. It's not tunnel vision, right? You have things feel fairly open, right? You can still see the black around the edges, but overall it's a really good experience. And the other aspect besides resolution and field of view here that we're touching on this slide is the refresh rate, right? Kind of in line with the idea of animation, the animation and perceiving things as fluid motion. Comes the refresh rate becomes extremely important. And part of the reason why this is important is the fact that you have a tracking system that's trying to match how you move in the real world with how you're going to move in the virtual world. And if those things get out of sync, right, it's not going to feel right. It'll feel, well, at best, it'll feel a little bit off. At worst, it'll be heavily nausea-inducing and just make you sick. So lower frame rates tend to be more highly correlated with simulation sickness. So if you can get that higher frame rate, not only will things feel more in sync, but it'll just seem more smooth, more fluid, and that actually makes a really big difference. So the other thing to note here is that these numbers are not exactly what you're used to, right? You might think of 60 frames per second as the gold standard for what games should achieve, but it's the bar has definitely been raised, and when it comes to VR, that number is no longer meaningful. If you're hitting 60 frames per second on the desktop, then that's good. That's pretty good, unless you're playing some kind of competitive game where you're a professional gamer and you care about cranking things way up. There is benefit to be had past 60 hertz, but if a game produced a steady 60 frames per second for every frame very consistently, right? Generally, I don't know anyone that wouldn't find that to be a good experience. So let's go through some more here. Valve Index, Pimax, something to watch out for. I'm sure that fills a niche somewhere if you have a need for really high field of view and really dense resolution. The Sony PlayStation VR. This is the only one on this list that not the only one. In addition to the Pimax, the only one I haven't tried. So this resolution is pretty low. You get 960 by 1080 per eye, and there is definitely a screen door effect at that level. But I should note that not all pixel grids are created equally. And if you really get into the details and you look at a panel, you could see 960 by 1080 looking, more legible or less legible depending on how the subpixels are arranged inside of there. And like a lot of mobile phone technology, they will do this striping kind of mechanism where they kind of skip every other color and they leave information out, and they're arranged in kind of a different pattern. Whereas if you were to have red, green, and blue as a stripe and all together and just really close together, right, that would produce a much different feel than if you were arranged them in a different way. And I don't think I have a slide to showcase that here, but it's kind of just something I'm thinking about as we talk through this. How did I lose the chat? There it is. All right. PlayStation VR is not great. Yeah. I think it's probably got other issues as well with the tracking of the hand controllers, which is another big thing to focus on in VR. So Vive was one of the first ones that came out, along with the Oculus Rift. Those are the two big ones. This HTC Vive Pro, we have one of these sitting in the lab if you wanted to set that up and check it out. And we have lots of Oculus Rifts, and I believe we have a couple Quests as well. If you talk to Professor Sadajic about that, you can check them out. So, all right. So one I kind of left off the list that where 60 hertz actually does matter a little bit is the Gear VR, which is one of the VRs where you slide your phone in, and that's pretty much being phased out and ignored at this point due to the fact that it only tracks your orientation, not your position, and that's the same for the hand controller. So not having that full positional freedom and a controller that you can move around in space is just like hugely limiting. So if you take something that's very similar to the phone-based thing, the Oculus Quest, this is an all-in-one that has a way of tracking where it has cameras on. I don't remember how many cameras, but on various sides of the panel, there's cameras on the headset looking out, and the cameras can see little LEDs that are emitting some ultraviolet light that's not visible, right? And it picks that up, and it can determine, it can localize, figure out where everything is at, and then you have that full positional freedom in there. And these panels run at 72 hertz, and that's not bad. I played around with the Quest quite a bit, and it feels pretty comfortable. I think I think one of you guys said you had it. Was it burned? I forget. But let's see here. Those are all mainstream. Yeah, Burn has one. The Valve Index can also run at 120 hertz if you have the hardware that can push that sort of thing. So, cycles per second is good for understanding what's actually happening, but from a developer's perspective, we tend to think about the budget, the amount of time we allocate to do certain things in our code. Right? We have some AI code or something that draws stuff. We only have a certain amount of time to do all that stuff if we want to present the frame to the screen in time. So I think it's really useful to look at what these actually mean, right? Like 30 hertz would be 33 milliseconds per frame, which is very common on the PlayStation 4 and the current Xbox. Consoles largely kind of stuck to this just because their CPUs were so weak that they had to spend a lot of time there just to make up for that. But this is kind of like the bare minimum. Any games falling below 30 starts to feel pretty poor. But 30 is okay, given that you're able to make that, pump that out like I'm losing the metaphor here. Just like clockwork. That's what I'm looking for, right? If you can make this thing just like be very well paced and be like, hey, I'm not gonna take 34 milliseconds this frame and then 16 the next, right? However much you take, you're very consistent about it, and then you synchronize such that you're able to make that happen in exactly the time frame, right? It's well paced. And if you have this even pacing, then 30 hertz, it doesn't feel too bad for a normal game. In VR, that would definitely break things. If we want to put this, anchor this to another number, I think I've mentioned John Carmack to you guys before last quarter. He's a legendary sort of game developer who created the Quake engine, Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, right? He pioneered a lot of different things, and he was also largely responsible for the work done bringing VR to mobile, right, and creating the Oculus Quest. So in doing all this research and kind of pushing things in the VR side for low-end hardware, what he found is that the thing you needed to shoot for in order for a quality experience was to measure the amount of time from when you move, right? You move your head, everything starts getting computed on the CPU, it gets rendered, and then it's output on the display, and finally, the display reaches your retina. The idea of going from motion to photons out there needs to be under 20 milliseconds. Less than or more than 20 milliseconds, it starts to really have a more dramatic impact on the experience of VR. So there's a little kind of benchmark for you right there. So motion to photons latency needs to be under 20 milliseconds. That's not totally to be confused with the amount of time per frame, right? Because there's all this overhead in anything you do. So you want to make sure that you're pumping things out really quick so that from motion to photons, you actually do get underneath 20. I'm guessing that if you're hitting 72 hertz, 13.8, this probably doesn't make it under 20, but maybe. I really don't know. This might be like right on the cusp, but 90 hertz definitely gets you there. And that's 11 milliseconds per frame, right? These are minuscule frame budgets. Imagine rendering the complex scenes that you see in major games in less than 11 milliseconds. You got to think really carefully about what you do here. So, all that said, performance could kind of take a backseat when you're doing things on a computer monitor, but bad performance in VR is a way bigger problem, right? You don't want to make your users sick. It's like if it's not comfortable to experience what you create, then you don't really even have a chance for what you create to stand on its own, right? It's already going to be bad. But to bring it all together, why is this so expensive? 720p at 30 hertz, 27 million pixels per second, right? We can think about this in terms of pixels that we have to deal with here. And I think that's really illustrative of why this is so important and why VR is so heavy to begin with. So 1080p at 60 hertz, right? This is kind of like what you'd expect a low to mid-range gaming machine to be able to do right now. 124 million pixels per second. We have a 30-inch monitor. I don't think that's relevant at all, but 2560 by 1600 at 60 hertz, 245 million. Here's a 4K monitor. That's not the normal 4K resolution, but at 30 hertz, 265 million pixels per second. And then let's take this VR resolution right here, which might seem like a weird number, but if you guys can remember what the problems we had with aliasing, when you see aliasing and weird sparkle and shimmer in your game, it's not so bad on a monitor, but it can be very distracting and not just look very poor in VR. So what ends up happening with VR is generally frames are typically rendered at a resolution that's higher than what you can actually display. And then that gets downsampled after that, right? So it's a form of anti-aliasing. This would be kind of a method of like a version of super sampling. And if you wanted to do this per eye, right, we'd actually have to have a different view for every single eye you view. The way things look between your left eye and right eye are going to be close to the same, but not exactly. And that difference is what accounts for stereo vision. So you actually do, for the most part, have to render things twice. So doing that resolution twice and at 90 hertz, you're talking like 500 million pixels already, right? And there are things you can do to reduce this a little bit, some optimizations, but you can see that the workloads that we're dealing with just start to kind of get out of control. So it's not like you can just keep dialing the resolution up because you're paying a huge performance penalty for doing that. So there's always got to be some kind of workarounds to deal with this issue. But the workloads are heavy and you got to do it really fast for a good experience. So being very careful about what does and doesn't lead to good performance, it will be very important here. And if any of you guys plan on getting more into VR later, let me know and we can actually get into some performance related topics in Unity. Okay, so getting into it. There's a few main ways here, right? You're either going to use an HTC Vive or a Valve Index, which is going to use the Steam VR ecosystem, right? You'll have to download a platform called Steam, actually, which is kind of a portal for games, but it also has the VR support built into it for those devices. Or you can use an Oculus, which really is kind of the easier way to go here. And the main reason for that is that these two little sensors, these are the things that can determine where you're positioned and located in space. These things can just, they got the little stand here and they can sit on your desk and you can position them, and it's pretty easy. And this is what's known as kind of an outside-in tracking system, right? So the headset's not doing the tracking. These sensors are seeing where the headset and the controllers are at, and it's tracking us from the outside. This is contrast this with an inside-out system, which is the Oculus Quest I talked about, right? It looks kind of like this, but now you got cameras here, right? So it's kind of looking from where you're at out and figuring out your position and orientation in space. So those inside-out systems, which are very, that much more convenient because you don't have to have these sensors on your desk, allow you to do the same thing. And I believe we have an Oculus Rift S, which is a slightly newer version of this Rift, which does exactly that. So if you want a desktop VR, I believe you can talk to Professor Sadajic about that. She has one. That would be like probably the lowest friction way for you to get into this on the desktop, and develop actually. Probably what I would recommend. Alternatively, you can have tracking that uses basically a form of it's not LiDAR, maybe it is LiDAR, but this is a laser-based system where there's like kind of UV lasers that are kind of just scanning the area right here, and it syncs up with this. And the problem with this is that you need to mount these guys right here on the wall or on a tripod or something, and that can be a little bit cumbersome to do. Alternatively, let's say you're creating something and you want to target both of them, right? If you try to use the SteamVR code that you can get to go with the HTC Vive or the Valve Index, right? What you create won't necessarily be viewable on the Oculus, although I'm not sure how long that will be true. There's kind of an open platform underlying VR called OpenVR, and I think Oculus was going to start supporting that, but I'm not sure what the state of that is at this point. Generally, right now it's kind of use SteamVR for these guys, use Oculus integration for this one. And if you want to use both, you'd need some kind of platform abstraction so that you can maybe just write your code in something else. For example, there's this open source project called VRTK we've used in the past, and I know they're still going. I'm not sure exactly where things are at or where we stand in the ecosystem right now. A lot of things are changing, and I know this is still viable, but this may change in the near future actually. So let's keep on going. If you're on Oculus, you'll go here. If you were going to do the Vive or the Index, you're going to install Steam. And actually, here's another reason why the SteamVR headsets can be cumbersome, right? They do require Steam, and if you're on campus or you're using the VPN, you won't be able to start Steam because it communicates over like a special port, right? So your web browser communicates on port 80, and Steam communicates on some other port, right? And the NPS firewall will block that. When we originally got these, I worked with iTax to get some special permissions to allow those ports to go through, but you kind of have to go through the channel and set up your machine so that it's on kind of the whitelist to be able to connect there. Let's see what Joe says. OpenVR works with Oculus, but it's very bare bones. Okay, so you're probably just really limited on what you get there. You don't get VR avatar, like you might not get meshes in your hands so that you can see your hands. And then some of the other things that add in there. So, yeah, if you wanted to jump through all these hoops, and in some ways, it might be worth it for using the Valve Index, but probably the easier way to go, what I'd recommend is using the Oculus Rift S. It has inside-out tracking. You don't have to set up any sensors anywhere. Maybe get your app working in kind of a platform agnostic way, maybe through VRTK. And if you want what the Valve Index has to offer, you can just move over to it later. But I guess I should mention why you would even want to do that. Let's see. I don't think I have a picture of the Valve Index. Let's just come over here. Say Valve Index. What I really wanted to show is the controllers. So that's like the real differentiating factor. So let's see this. All right. So if you look right here, you know, these hand controllers come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. And the really nice thing about these that come with the Valve Index is pretty much that they're attached to your hands, right? This thing actually has a little loop that goes around your palm, and you can open your hand and it stays right there with you. And it also has finger sensors right here that knows whether your fingers are lifted up or not. So you have like more or less full articulation of your fingers. You can see that reflected in the game. You can squeeze here, it feels natural, and it just kind of like feels more like an extension of your hand. Whereas if you look at these for comparison, right? The HTC Vive has these, you know, like TV remote control wands that they're okay, but they certainly don't feel like your hands, right? It feels like you're very much holding on to, you're gripping something. So these are the Knuckles controllers from another view. If you look at, compare this to the Rift controllers. Maybe a matter of personal preference, but I prefer these over the you know, the little wand controllers for the Vive. But these require you to be holding on to them, right? You always have to be gripping this, and your fingers come around here. You can't just let go of it because then you'll actually be dropping it. So it's really like you're always holding something. So there's a lot to be said for what you can do with your hands, right? There's these big jumps in the way you perceive VR, whether it's from you know, maybe like, hey, I'm just looking at this Google Cardboard or this phone and I'm moving around. You're like, hey, that's pretty neat. I can move my head and things kind of track with me. But you know, that soon feels like a real limitation. And then you're able to make your head kind of move around in space. You'd be like, okay, now I can kind of explore the environment. Still very limiting, right? How do humans move around the world? We interact with our hands all the time. So any kind of new abilities or fidelity that are afforded to you and what you can do with your hands really just have this huge impact on the experience you have. So let's see here. Check the chat. Anti-throw. What's this? Yeah, that's probably pretty useful. Reminds me of the Nintendo Wii when the people first got that. People would put up images of like broken televisions because they let go of their remote control when they were bowling or something like that. Okay, so I guess I'd like to talk about VR because we're already 40 minutes in there. Do I have anything else here before we go back to animation? So things are changing in Unity too also. So previously in Unity, they didn't really require too much just to get started, right? You come in here in these settings and check a box. But I'm a little unsure of what the state is right now. This is deprecated, and there's kind of a new way to bring this in. And, we can kind of get into it and play with it together tomorrow, and I'll kind of get more to the bottom of that. When we do get it into Unity, it can be kind of auto magic. You know, you just hit play, and if you have a camera in the scene, well, now your head just kind of takes over that camera, and wherever you move your head, it moves the camera, and that's what you see. In the editor, you know, you'll if someone's watching in the editor rather than the headset, right? You obviously don't see two eyes; you only see one. So I think you can actually choose which eye it shows you in there. But if you put the headset on, you know, you'll see it without without leaving the editor. And let's stop that right there, and I'll move over to some more animation stuff. All right, so let's go to the Start page, I guess. Oops. Okay, so if you go to mixamo.com, something owned by Adobe, you can actually just come in here and grab models and animations and just very easily use them. It's kind of amazing. So I guess it defaulted to this army guy, or I think he's a SWAT guy, not army. What am I looking at? So this is animations. If you come up here to the characters tab, here's the SWAT guy, not squat. You can just change your character here. This guy looks like almost like a Empire, like a Star Wars trooper or something. Let's roll with him. So I'll pick him, and let's say I can just download. When you come in here to do this, you'll have a few options here, and there's FBX for Unity and Collada. You'll want to use the FBX for Unity. Bring him in a T-pose. That's what most game engines like. And give that a moment. And I don't know, let's see here. Projects, Unity. I'll put this in art. I don't know, maybe I'll just make something in here. Mixamo. So that's guy's a SWAT guy. All right, I got the model in here, and let's go ahead and go into Unity and take a look at what we have. Let's make a new scene here. I put it in something called Mixamo. So I have him selected. Let's look at him in the inspector. All right. So he's looking a little bit naked. So let's see if we can fix that. Go into our import settings. There's no animation, but let's go to materials. This could just be that, do I have to use the old external materials? That means if I drag this guy in here. Yeah, he's naked. All right, so there might be a better way to do this, but I think selecting the external materials will fix it. Yeah, so materials using a texture as a normal map. It must be marked as a normal map. Go ahead and do it. Okay, so there we go. Now he's looking better. Bring him in here, see him looking good. So good, we got a character that was about as painless as I can imagine it being. It's pretty nice to just be able to do this, and it gets even nicer when you just come over here and you can search from a database to different animations. Like that's amazing. What kind of animation should we look for here? I guess we can just look at some different ones. I can do something silly. This is agony, zombie stand up, pointing. I'm sure he'd like have him do some jazz dancing. All right, nice. That's pretty sweet. Well, let's try it. Oh, actually, we have some options here. Let's look at our options. So, range. You can actually make him get more crazy. I don't know what overdrive is, but oh yeah, let's not do that. Arm space. So this is cool. You know, they have some options here for you to tweak these. I'll just leave it at that. I could mirror it if I wanted to, but he looks pretty asymmetric, so that's probably a bad idea. Download. FBX for Unity. Download it without skin? I don't know. Well, so with skin might sound pretty weird, but I think this just means with different bone weighting, maybe. I don't know. Let's download this and find out. It's fine. Back to Unity. All right, now we've got some jazz action here. If I have that selected and I come back to animation section, why is no model? Okay. So pretty nice. So let's see here. What happens if we just drag an animation in here? I think you can probably do that. Or maybe this just actually has a model. You have to tell it to use an animation. I don't think this will do anything, but let's find out. If I align the camera with me, well, let's hit play. Yeah, so, all right. It's just has the first frame of that animation, which is not super helpful. We can tweak our animation that we had before. So let's bring in the regular SWAT guy, and we'll give him an animator. Let's just use our seal controller, and he needs an avatar. No, he should have his own avatar, I think. And just make a new one. Create avatar mask. Now, all right, let me look at this. Animation. Can I just do it from here? No. Is it? Might be expecting something else. Let's make a new controller here. Create new animator controller. So SWAT controller. That in there. Let's give him some jazz dancing. I don't know if he'll do anything without an avatar, but that's default. So let me see. Yeah, I guess he's good. That didn't loop, but why is there no avatar there? If you come in here, model, avatar definition, no avatar. Create from this model. Yeah, do that. I don't remember having to do this before. What is his root? Probably the hips. I don't know. Let's try it. So now he has an avatar. SWAT avatar. Oh no. Be careful what you double click on. Okay, select that there. That's weird that nothing's showing up there. Well, okay. Okay, so we're just about out of time here. Really just wanted to, show you this resource that's, really nice and has all kinds of different things that you could get in here. Maybe, let's find a shoot animation, right? There's a ton of them in here. It's super convenient being able to just kind of preview, see what you're getting, download it, and, do a little quick setup. So, you guys have any questions? All right, well, I'll stick around if you want to talk about anything. See you guys tomorrow.